Okay. I'm Victor Rodriguez. I am Costa Rican. I'm a lawyer. I got a master program in Costa Rica and other countries, but it's important that theoretical approach, but the combination with the practice improve the knowledge and the approach of human rights. So I started working at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as a lawyer, head of the legal department, and then deputy secretary at the Inter-American Court for 10 years. So I learned how to write a draft of the judgment of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Then I was working at the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights. The Inter-American Institute of Human Rights, it's a regional organ for education promotion of human rights. I learned in 1 year working with victims, traveling, helping to the government to improve the legal framework, constitutional law, drafts of acts different on human rights, and working with civil society, ombudsperson for 1 year, a lot, but I was working 10 years. So I worked 10 years at the Inter-American Court and 10 years at the Inter-American Institute on Human Rights. In the meantime, I was working for 6 years as a member and chair member of the Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture, visiting prisons in the whole world with the prevention approach. Finally, I was a member of a human rights committee of United Nations. I am a professor, and now I have an organization working in strategic litigation of human rights, IRRASOT. My experience working in Latin American court or in the Americas using the Inter-American Court of Human Rights experience, it's how to learn or how to understand that it is possible to change a structural problem using one individual case. I think it's a kind of activism in the judiciary, and it is possible by means of the reparation of non-repetition, for example, to give much more input to the final decision in how to improve. In one case, the history of a lot of victims in similar circumstances without being part of the case. I'm going to give the opposite example. In the Human Rights Committee, I was member, for example, and there was there were cases against the same country for the same problem. The problem has to do with lack of investigation of forced disappearance, for example, in one country. I tried to explain to the Human Rights Committee the same practice of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to declare that forced disappearance or the lack of disappearing in that case of this person must be applied for the future for any other similar cases. The Human Rights Committee avoid these kinds of strategic decision, and I have to say it's complicated because the committee prefer 1,000 cases with the same problem, the same stupid law, for example, because there is an obstacle to the access to justice. It doesn't make sense. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights, in one case, closed the discussion because the problem is the law, and the law is contrary to the American Convention of Human Rights, declare that this specific law is contrary to the American Convention of Human Rights. So any kinds of future cases, there is no future cases because solve the problem in one case. The Human Rights Committee maintain the same discussion for years, it doesn't make sense. Repetitive cases, it doesn't make sense. And they have the possibility to declare, because non-repetition, for example, similar jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Anyway, as a lesson learned, as a student, I was in charge of internship of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights students. So I like to work with the students and how to try to student is evaluate, because you have energy, you have a lot of impetus to learn about human rights. And one part of the best part was working with a student in internship. And for example, 2 students of internship for United States, there were lawyers after of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So my recommendation as part of being a student, think about any kinds of volunteers on internship is the best way to learn, to give something to the human rights institution, and probably to take advantage in the personal, your future personal. I think so. It's the best way to open doors for the future. Lawfare is the new wrong practices of authoritarian government, executive branch, and probably they got the power for election, taking advantage of democratic process. But one time, this president, for example, got the power, trying to weaken the democratic institution for re-election, to change the law, and cooptation. Cooptation of the power is how to maintain control of the Congress, for example, or the judiciary. And they start with the Attorney General office. If there is no independent Attorney General, so they start with fake accusation against enemies, quote enemies. What kind of enemies? Who knows? Politicians, businessmen, or any other thing. Lawfare, it's these kinds of practices to control everything without control, to maintain the control and the abuse of the power. And the challenge has to do with the relationship with the media. If there is no media independence, so they use the media to persecution of these kinds of enemy for politics or any other thing. For me, these kinds of lawfare start in Europe, in Poland, Hungary, Turkey, in Latin America, in Mexico, Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua. There is a book about this challenge, is how democracy died. And they explain that democracy is dying not because coup d'etat. It's not an issue of coup d'etat. It's worse. It's how to destroy it since the own inside of the democracy, the democratic institutions.
Thank you.
I believe in the human rights system as an opportunity. It's the only way to think in how to improve all the structural problem, economical problem, institutional problem, access to justice problem, education, is by means of a new lecture, resignification of the human rights as a whole. Because traditionally, people believe human rights are just no violation of the life, no torture, personal integrity, no genocide, and so on. They are the worst violation of human rights. But violation of human rights has to do with much more structural problems. And I think in this new revision of human rights, now the government has much more obligation to respect by means of public policy, economic, social, cultural rights, environmental rights, climate change. So they open a tremendous, abanico in this regard. So the system must involve in this new resignification of the human rights in much more creative way. And how combine economy and human rights, for example. I think the economy and development as part of the human rights agenda and the system, Inter-American system, United Nations system, they have to talk in the same language as the most progressive protection in favor of the victim. In my experience, how to convince that the government, that the best way to protect human rights by means of prevention approach. In general terms, international protection of human rights is reactive. So the violation of cure right now, nothing to do, it's just to repair. I think the most difficult is understanding how has a prevention policy by means of public policy to prevent human rights, avoid violation of human rights. It's a challenge because it depends of to invest in terms of money, budget, finances, economy, education, construction of facilities to protect human rights, prevention. I think the challenge, how I understand, prevention is a social inversion. Mm-hmm. I love litigations before I started in human rights. And probably I was in litigation of human rights without the idea that I was working on human rights, because I was lawyer in criminal law. And the part of my defense in criminal law clients has to do in the first stage to understand the due process, the rule, the guarantees, and I was in litigation in human rights without my own idea that it was a part of human rights. Then, when I studied human rights in my master program, they opened my mind about this kind of understanding. And I decided litigation because I think litigation is the best part of the law in my point of view. Nobody has, or a lot of people prefer theoretical teaching. Litigation is not teaching. Litigation is how to apply the law, rewriting and rereading the norm. I am an enemy of positivisms. For me, positivism doesn't make sense. I don't study law for apply the norm as it is. There is a principle of law. Lex dura, lex. I don't think in that principle. I think that principle works and play a role in one specific moment. But I think the law is, evolutionate according to the life of the people, the circumstances, and sometimes the law is an obstacle to the law. So I'm happy if we can reform the law, not necessarily by another new law, but by means of interpretation of the law. This is creative, this is interesting, this is a living law. So I am a lawyer in litigation because I believe in the judges. I believe in how to change the world using inclusive the law, a specific law, constitution. Okay, our NGO, IRESOT, International Institute of Social Responsibility and Human Rights, opened a new door to understand human rights. Human rights is not an issue only with the states and victims and citizens. Human rights is part of the private corporation too. The idea is to involve, to change in humanitarian, for example, progressive protection of the victims in a social dialogue. In the social dialogue within state, civil society, and private sector. If you can switch these three lines of protection of human rights in cooperation by means of policy, private policy, public policy, is the opportunity to democratize the development, the economy, the protection of the human rights, how invest in the best way the budget in human rights. Humanitarian law is not only solidarity. Solidarity, it's important. Solidarity is urgent in some cases. Sometimes we have to save life of people, especially of human rights defenders, if they are living in a risk territory, for example, because armed conflict or any other thing. But I don't think that to catch a person victim of a risk and put here in another country is enough. I think mobility, human mobility, is to save the life of these people, but we need to guarantee to this person in another country, in another region, to maintain a plan of life, trying to, in training or trying to support them with a job, or to maintain not only his life aside, but also plan to life. And my criticisms for international organization believe that put one person from here to another territory person is enough, and I don't think so.
Thank you
very much. I think there is evolution process since 10 years ago with the creation of the working group on business and human rights and the principle of ROGI, of principle business and human rights principle, because now the big corporations understand that they have three pillars obligations: prevention, protection, and reparation, a violation of human rights. So they are changing the cultural, corporative culture, for example, to avoid in terms of responsibility, for example, that they have obligation to protect the environmental, to respect the labor rights, to respect the policies against sexual harassment or labor harassment, to pay taxes. So, and in the past, the social responsibility had to do just to give a little money to painting a school in the town. This is not social responsibility. Social responsibility, it's much more the donations. It's much more philanthropic. I prefer that the corporation give good salaries to the people with responsibility, because it's a chain of production chain, for example, to give people a opportunity for full labor rights, guarantee the others human rights. If you have good salary, you have education for your children, you have culture, you have healthcare system, you have everything in terms of minimum standards of human rights. So social responsibility now is changing every day, every time, in terms of the policy. The government must create business and human rights policy in a social dialogue with civil society and all parties to improve or to assume an engagement with the society in the future. When I started working with social responsibility more than 10 years ago, I believe that corporations were thinking much more in marketing, campaign, or trying to demonstrate that they are making something good for the other. For example, with Teleton, you know Teleton campaign? For just a little money, for example, 1,000 euros or something like that. They say, oh, I'm going to give 1,000 for children with disability, blah, 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 for free, practically. Teleton is okay, but it's just the social responsibility is how to learn fishing to the people, not give the fish. It's a basic principle of common sense. But the other thing, in terms of marketing, today, if you have a company and the company violates human rights, environmental, you are going to lose custom, because now people is much more educated. People is reading everything about your products, for example. If you have seal for protection of the environment and everything, maybe your product would be more expensive. I prefer to pay for this product than the other, because it has information in favor of, against children labor and so on. So now we are much more exigent in terms of our rights as consumers. Makes sense. If you apply for a volunteer program, you must choose the best for you and for the organization, especially if it's an NGO, because the NGO has no money to invest time, for example, for the students' feedback, explaining everything. No? So it's not fair that the small NGO, for example, gave you an opportunity, and the effort of the NGOs to open just a place is thinking about taking advantage of your experience and knowledge, and how to win. It's different with international organization because they have a more programmatic plans of internship. So you must to check, you must to apply, and depends on what you want. You must choose, for example, if you want to litigate in international law, probably United Nations petition units in Geneva, Inter-American Court of Human Rights Secretariat, European Union, so on, would be best places for learn about litigation, or any other NGO in litigation process. But if you want to learn about activism in human rights, it's different to litigation. And activism has to do how to get money by means of fundraising, how to make a proposal for money for human rights project, how to work with children, environmental. All of them organizations have different methods of impact in terms of activism. So you must decide what kind of human rights approach you want before asking for one internship in everywhere.